Hi there, and welcome back to our podcast series covering the materials out of the book God's Story. I'm John, and I'm joined by Judy, Ryan, and Mike. Seeking to be wise, they became fools.
That's our motto.
So that short verse,
we ended up like this.
I was waiting for the dun dun dun. Okay.
Sorry. Missed the cue, John.
That short verse really describes the fall, but there's a lot of implications from the fall that we'll dive into on this particular podcast. So last session was beautiful. It was creation. Even God described it as very good. How in the world did we make this turn to the dark side called the fall? How'd that happen?
Yeah, so God put a little test in the garden, right? He wanted man and woman to trust him as his image bearers, and they listened to the voice of the deceiver who questioned God's character and put that little carrot out in front of them that not only they could be made as image bearers of God, but they can be God, that they could rule themselves and that they could define good and evil for themselves. So
It was fruit, Mike. It wasn't carrots, a vegetable.
yeah, so you get what I'm saying, right? So he put this, so the enemy deceived them to think that they could rule themselves without any negative consequences. So God warned them that they would die. And he said, no, you're not going to die. You're actually going to become like God. So there's that little deception that he throws in there. And so they believed it. And it was that the lie was so tempting to them to be their own God and to rule the planet Earth not as God's image bearers. They wanted to rule the earth as their own image bearers. They wanted to bear their own image, so to speak, and so create their own rules to play by. And that's what the tree represents. So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that the rest of the Bible is wisdom literature of the fool and the wise, right? So that's where that quote comes from. They were seeking to be wise, but they became fools because they're seeking for wisdom outside of God, and there is no wisdom outside of God. And so all things that appear to be wise are foolish in the end. You know, so all the temptation is taking the God's good creation and then twisting it, just a little twist to make it something that it's not. And so when we as human beings are made God's image bearers, we still are God's image bearers even after the fall, but all of our thinking now is bent and twisted, and so we make up our own rules. We think we're wise, but we're not wise. And so when we fail to seek after God and to come back to him and to admit our error and to admit that we've fallen from him, if we don't do that, then we remain in this place of self-deception, deceiving ourselves, deceiving other people. And the world is just full of all kinds of philosophies and ways of thinking and all kinds of alternative stories to live by rather than the one true story that we're living in, which is God's story.
I don't know if you guys have ever asked yourselves, I have, but why did he put the tree there? That was something for me
Right?
growing up
Yeah.
when I was younger, especially
Yeah.
not understanding why didn't God just make it where they couldn't sin, and then none of this would have happened. It could have been perfect. But it really does come back to as well relationship, which we talked about last session. God being a relational God who made us in his image as relational beings, and the first and ultimate relationship that he has and wants is our relationship with him. Even before our relationships with one another. And so for there to be authentic relationship, there has to be volition. There has to be a will. There has to be an ability to choose not to be in that relationship. And the little analogy I use often is if I have my phone and I tell Siri to every day at 2:00, tell me that I'm amazing and she loves me. She might do it. I don't know. I haven't tried that. Fortunately, I'm not at that place in life yet.
I'm a little worried about you if you did.
Alexa will.
Not there. Alexa will. Yeah. Well, fine. I'm gonna go to Alexa then. But if I do that, it may the Siri may respond that way. But how much does that mean to me? How significant is that? It's not at all, because it's just doing what it's programmed to do. It doesn't have any choice. Whereas when my kids come up, right, when another person comes up and they, as young kids would come and sit down on my lap and throw their arms around me and just give me a hug and just, I love you, Dad. You know, that means the world, because they didn't have to do it. This was a choice that they made. So we can't have real relationship without the possibility of sin and hurt and rebellion. And so why did he put the tree there? Because he wants a real relationship with his image bearers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you've touched on already, but what are some of the ugly consequences of this fall? What specifically does it lead to in relationships? And
How long do we have?
Baldness is one of them.
Resemble that.
Yeah. So broken physically, right? So that is one of them. We are broken physically, which leads to death. So they were told you won't die by the enemy, but we did die. God didn't kill them immediately, but death did come into human experience because of that. So we were broken and alienated from God and from ourselves physically. All kinds of disease, ailments, pain, suffering, and ultimately death. So there's 4 ways, and there's a chart in the book there that shows 4 ways that we're broken. So we're alienated from physically, we're alienated spiritually from God and our relationship with Him, socially from our relationships with each other, and then psychologically in our own minds, our own thinking. We're alienated from ourselves. And so in the book, we talk about how the counseling industry is so lucrative because people don't know themselves. They have no idea how to figure out, why do I think the way I do? Why do I do what I do? And how come I can't stop doing these things? So we're alienated from ourselves. We're broken internally. So those are the 4 major ways that theologians, Tim Keller talks about that in a lot of his literature, is just those 4 ways, spiritually, psychologically, socially, and then physically.
And you talk about alienation, Mike, which is separation. And that was the result of sin, right? Is separation, and our separation from each of those things. And Greek word for separation is death. Right, that's the actual understanding of what death is a separation. So the warning of God, holds true, that Adam and Eve sinned, they fell, and death was the result in each of those ways. And it goes back to the image of God as well, and the breaking of God's image. So we talk a lot about that even last session, and it wasn't annihilated, it wasn't completely done away with. But God's image in us is a broken image. So as we would look into a mirror that's meant to reflect, as we're meant to reflect who God is as His image bearers, you look into a mirror that's been shattered. There's still a reflection, and you can still piece certain things together and try to make sense of things, but it's incredibly difficult. And the more broken, the more messed up that image and reflection is. So that's what we're working with now, is a humanity that is a humanity filled with broken mirrors and reflections of God that people are trying to make sense of it with each other.
Yeah. The other helpful image to think about is we've all been to like a carnival or a fun house, and the mirrors that are all bent. And you can look in there and say, I don't remember my head being that big.
There's nothing fun about this house.
Exactly. So it does kind of resemble you. It's kind of like one of those guys that draw the caricatures. They sit there and draw a very exaggerated version of you. So that's what happens in the fall, is that all of those ways get very bent and twisted. And so we still bear God's image. We're still called upon, actually, to rule and reign over His creation in a way that gives Him glory and reflects Him well, but we're incapable of doing so. We can't, even though we may even want to or try to. So we're alienated in all those different ways. And just think about it. Our world is full of relationships that are broken. Not just with God. Yeah, we're spiritually deceived in all kinds of worldly philosophies and religions, trying to figure out, what happened, how did we get here, and who is God, or are there many gods, or is there one God? And so we're just so confused in terms of our spiritual reality. but we're also we got all kinds of relationship problems. Think about even in grade school, all the fights on the playground and all the ways of jockeying for position and who's going to get to play, on, the first round or whatever. So all these ways that we're just
last.
Yeah, who gets picked last. So all the social ways that we're just broken. So you just story after story after story, book after book, movie after movie is about all of these different ways that we're alienated from ourselves, from others, and just trying to rise above, overcome, all of the ways that we're broken in this world.
And I think it's so interesting with kids. I remember Bill Cosby talking about that we come in
You can't
broken.
mention him. He's been canceled.
Yeah, well, before. When he was funny. He was very funny, but he talked about everyone's like, oh, I love kids. They're so truthful. And he's like, they're the biggest liars. You come in and a kid's got an Oreo all over his face. Do you eat the cookies? Nope. And so you can see, like in a child, so much beauty and delight to crawl up on your lap and go, I love you, Daddy. And then you see the schoolyard breaking out, jockeying for position, cookies all over their face. So we come into this world, broken and really without a savior, hopeless, right? That we are stuck in that state.
Yeah. And that's why I've always disagreed with a lot of, whether it be sociologists or psychologists, but that argue man is inherently good. And right? That was funny. That is funny.
Sorry.
Just and that's why I joke all the time.
That's age and wisdom speaking.
Yeah, clearly they don't have kids. Like anyone who would put that forth, like that you see innately, there is a pride and a rebellion and a selfishness and a sin brokenness in every human being. Right. We're born into it, and it's born in us.
I think what some psychology and sociology is trying to attempt to do is recover, without using the language of the Bible, recover Imago Dei.
Apart from day.
Yeah, exactly. Apart from day.
Yeah.
Right. But because there is something that we do see in human beings that reflect God, no matter how broken and twisted we are, we do reflect something bigger than ourselves and more majestic than ourselves. So there's got to be something there. So they're grasping at straws to find what that thing is.
Right.
And so it just turns into psychobabble. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. And doggone it. People like me. We talk about that as we get into session 5. But there is something there with the Imago Dei, but it is broken. So human beings are intrinsically have value and worth and dignity, but in our current state without redemption, we're broken and twisted. So you can't just ignore that. You can't ignore the fact that there's something there. We ought to be able to rise above this, but we simply can't. Not on our own, not by ourselves and our own devices.
So you use the word depravity, I think, in the materials.
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about that. What does that mean in connection with the fall?
Yeah, so depravity was a word that Calvin used, and the Reformed theology is used quite a bit, that we are completely depraved. So absolute depravity just means that we are depraved in all of the aspects of who we are, but not an extent. So every aspect or faculty that we have, our thinking, our feeling, our behaving, all of those things are bent and twisted. But we're not totally depraved in the sense that we can't do anything good. We can't have any good thoughts. It's that we can't have all good thoughts all the time. We can't do all good behaviors all the time. Everything that we do, think, and feel will have depravity in it. That's just because we're totally depraved in that sense. So Calvin, he's misunderstood in the fact that he didn't say that everything man does is completely against God all the time. He said that, but everything that we think and do has a tendency to be bent and twisted away from God. So if it's pointing away from God and not pointing towards God, it's going to not hit the target. It's going to be off point. So that's the whole point of being depraved. So when we think about why do I feel the way I do? Why do I think the way I do? Why do I keep doing things that I actually despise? Like an alcoholic doesn't really want to be an alcoholic, and yet they keep going back to alcohol.
Romans 7.
Yeah, it's that's what Paul said. Yeah, the good I want to do, I don't do. The bad I don't want to do, I keep doing. Wretched man that I am, who will save me from this body of death? So yeah, total depravity has to do with just that, talking about being bent and twisted, you know?
And I think it's more than just a theological concept for everyone here and for everyone listening. I think we all know how many aspects of even the good things that we do, how often we're doing them for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
We'll do something right, but we're doing it selfishly because we want the kudos, we want the feedback, so the motive and intention is ultimately selfish and sinful. And you can even go to the Sermon on the Mount, and that's what Jesus exposed as well. Like it's, you've heard it said, and you think you're doing great because, you know, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, turn the other cheek. Right. That's how you're to be with toward one another. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has committed adultery in his heart. I mean, taking it to the heart issue of exposing, you may do things rightly, but this is still broken and damaged, and I came to heal this and to change this. That's the whole purpose.
Even Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, the famous love chapter of the Bible, which is read at all kinds of weddings and, you know, special events. What is love? Here's the qualities of love. But he starts out that whole argument with, even if you give all your possessions away to the poor and offer your body to be burnt as some kind of like heroic gesture, if you have not love, it doesn't profit you anything. So the whole point there is that, yeah, our motives are so twisted and bent that we can do all these heroic things. But if we don't truly have the love of God that is manifest through Jesus, and then receiving that love through Christ, then no matter what things appear to be good, they're worthless.
And they're of no merit. Right? Yeah. No merit and before the Lord.
Filthy rags, whitewashed tombs. There's
that's
a colorful language that God gives us.
Yeah, and that's a great picture too. That we maybe know that verse in Isaiah of, you know, our righteousness is as filthy rags, and but even that, I think there's some who would argue that we know the imagery, right? That it's referring to a woman's menstrual rag, and usually people go ew, but I don't think that's what the prophet was getting at. You know, that the suggestion is when that is a filthy rag, that is evidence of a woman has not conceived. Right, so there's no life in her, and so many would say that what the prophet's trying to communicate is that our works of righteousness are incapable of producing life.
They're dead.
They're
being
dead
fruitful
works.
and multiplying and filling the earth,
Right.
which what we're supposed to do as human beings. We can't fulfill that on our own.
Which makes me think of the tree of life and the
Yeah.
good and evil. It's like,
Yeah,
we never ate of the good tree. I'm looking
No.
forward. Well,
He-
we sort of
He
did.
took us out of the
He sorta
garden
did.
before we could eat from it, because he said, if they
Yes.
eat from this tree, then they'll live forever. And he didn't
Stuck
want
in a broken
and he didn't want us
state.
to live in that state. He wanted to redeem us, you know. So redemption had to come before we get to that tree of life, which is coming.
Yeah.
We're going to eat of that tree,
Right.
which we'll live forever in a new heaven and new earth someday.
And we deceive ourselves and tell us, well, we're good people. I'm a pretty good person. You know, we can.
I haven't killed anyone.
Yeah, right. This week.
That
No.
we know of.
So we also even being able to decide, you know, that's the fall, not knowing between what good and evil because the intentions of the heart. Like we really are put in such a hopeless state due to the fall. You know,
So
this is a very depressing chapter.
I want to keep it going.
It's a reality check. We
we
can't
talked-
skip over it.
We've talked about hopelessness.
Yeah.
We've talked about pain and suffering and depravity. Let's add one more from the fall is hell, right?
Yeah.
I don't think
yeah.
we've talked about hell. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what hell is. It's obviously, I think it's kind of like heaven is sometimes misunderstood Hell, I
Yeah.
think, is misunderstood too. Let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about it.
Well, if you look at the original creation, God made the heavens and the earth. There's no mention of hell. He didn't make hell, so he made the heavens and the earth. And we're supposed to rule and reign with Christ on the earth as his representatives. And actually at the end of the story, that's what we get back to, is ruling a new heaven and new earth as his representatives. So what hell is introduced as the rebellion takes place. So as we rebel against God and sin against him, then death enters into the picture. So hell is an extension of death. So death is the results of wanting to be independent of God. And so I like how C.S. Lewis talked about hell as being locked from the inside, not the outside. We lock ourselves in hell because we choose to be our own master. And we don't want God's help. We don't want to serve him. We don't want his redemption, his restoration. We want to try to figure it out on our own. And so hell is reserved for people who do not want the redemption and restoration that God is freely offering everybody. And instead, we convince ourselves that we can do it on our own. And so that is hell in and of itself. That's hell in this life. Mm-hmm. And then hell, everlasting hell, is an extension of that reality into eternity future.
You have a great quote at the bottom of page 35 and top of page 36 on hell. It says, "Hell is merely an extension of the self-destructive life of self-absorption that people live in this world. God gives us over to the results of our own desires, which exclude him for eternity."
Yeah.
There's that volition. It's powerful stuff, right?
Yeah.
One way or another.
Yeah, we separate ourselves first.
Yeah.
I think that's important too, that people understand God, as Mike mentioned, God didn't create earth and then create heaven and hell to see where we're going to go. Right? It's almost like earth is the gauntlet, and are we going to make it here or make it here? And that's not the biblical creation account. That there's heaven and earth, and sin broke and damaged that harmony in that relationship, and the idea and notion of hell, the way that it's the imagery of hell, we got to remember the flames, right? The flames, the that won't be quenched, and all that kind of imagery. It's biblically, flame represents so often it's the purification process. It's a purifying. And that is the purpose of hell, is to purify the sin that damages and destroys all the good that God has made. That is the purging place to be done and away with forever. And those who choose to remain in that sinful state choose that place of eternal separation from God. So for me, it's when people ask the question, well, why doesn't God do something about the evil in the world? He does. He does. And he has through his son and what he's done in that redemptive work. And ultimately, one day, it will be done away with forever. Yeah. And yet the same people that go, why doesn't God fix the evil in the world, have a major problem with God's solution.
Yeah.
Because we just don't like to we think of it wrongly.
And I think that whole idea of God preserving the good is throughout the Bible. Even the flood, where God brings about death and destruction to all the living creatures, humans and others, other creatures. It just seems so like overkill, really. Most people look at that, it's like, wow, that just seems like, overboard. But his desire was to bring about redemption and a new beginning with Noah and his family, almost like a brand new Adam and Eve, because it says in Genesis 6 that the heart of mankind was to do evil all the time. So their heart and their mind was constantly filled with evil. But God was dedicated to his original mission. Why did he make us? He made us to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over it as his image bearers. So the story of Noah is to get back on mission, to get back to that. And so, but what's revealed throughout the whole story, which we'll get to in the next session on redemption, is right from the beginning, the promise is given that a Savior will come. And so without that Savior, who had to be God himself in human form, as a man, becoming a man, without that, all human attempts to be types of Christ, they all fall short, Noah included. That Noah story ends terribly. He doesn't, meet the criteria of being the Redeemer or the Savior of the world. But the point I'm trying to make is that God is preserving this planet for his ultimate purposes. So when there's going to be a new heaven and new earth, does he cleanse this earth and make a brand new one out of it? I don't know. But when he destroyed the ancient world with water, he didn't destroy it.
Right.
He cleansed it. Same thing like what Ryan's talking about hell, is there's a cleansing, a separating of people who don't want God, don't want to be part of his kingdom, so that those who do can rule and reign with Christ for all eternity in a new heaven and new earth. So that's the whole point. It's a removing of people who don't want to be there.
Yeah.
They don't want to worship God. They don't want to love God.
So this session is very heavy and a little bit depressing, but it's so important, I think, to grasp this before we move into the next session, because understanding the dark condition that we're in just makes God's grace and what he provided as a way out for us just that much more powerful. So it's really good we get a hold of this. And thank you guys for joining us as we discuss the second phase of God's story. We'll look forward to seeing you next time with a much more positive tune. Take care.
Dun, dun, dun.